Hey there, this is Brendan, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over solving some math problems with decimal places. At this point, before we begin, I'd like to formally apologize. It's probably going to be a little bit hard to hear me this time around at the time of recording. I've just started getting over a cold, and so I've lost my voice, but please be patient with me. I will try to keep my voice as clear as possible, and we will get started. So just a brief overview of what we're going to be going over. We're going to be covering just the slightly altered ways that we're going to be going through things due to how decimals work. We're going to have some addition and subtraction. We're going to go over multiplying, and then we're going to go over dividing. And we're going to just show how you do things just a little bit different through each one because of the decimals. And then we're going to go a little bit more into detail with it as we go over some practice ones. Alright, so first things first, let's jump in and go through some adding and subtracting of decimals. So adding and subtracting are put together in this instance because there's not really any change in one or the other when you're doing it. They both work the same way when you're working with decimals. And so the first thing that you do is that you set up your equation by lining up your decimals together. We do that because we want to see them placed in the same way at the same time. And we also want to line up our whole numbers when we do so. The next thing that we do is we add any zeros that we would need, depending on how things look once we're done setting it up. We then solve our math problem, and once we finish that, we bring down the decimal number. So then just give a brief look of what that would look like. Here's an addition and a subtraction problem. So as you can see, we set them up so that the decimals are in the exact same spots. And despite the fact that there's some number space in between them, we have to line them up this way because we have to have the whole numbers on top of each other so that we can add them up properly. And then, again, we add the zeros as needed so that we can fill in those extra spaces so that we can answer things properly. Once we do that, we'll then solve our problems, and we'll bring the decimal point down into the correct place so that it's in front of all of the numbers to the right, and all of our ones and tens and all other numbers are on the other side of it. All right, jumping on to the next one, we're going to go into multiplying decimals. Now, the main thing about multiplying with decimals that's really nice is that multiplying decimals does not really change, except for in the end. And so the first thing that you do, of course, is you set up your equation, but rather than worry about where the decimal is located, you just line up your numbers. So then the last numbers on all of your equations are going to be lined up together. You'll notice with this example that we have a decimal that's only one space over, and then a decimal that's two spaces over, but our numbers are still lined up. So we're not worried about the decimals at all when we're first doing our multiplication setups. And so the next thing we do is that we solve the problem, and we make sure not to, again, worry about the decimals at all when we're first solving this. And so even as it's set up, we're just writing down the numbers. We're not writing down the decimals because we don't need to worry about that until we get to the next step. And so once we figured out our answer, which in this case is 2530, then we go to the next part, which is that we count the amount of numbers to the right of the decimals that we started with. And then we place our final decimal that many places inside with our answer. So as you look at the top, you'll notice we have 1, 2, 3 different numbers to the right of the decimal. And so if there are 3 to the right before we start, there have to be 3 to the right when we finish it. So our answer becomes 2.530. So that's the only real change when you're multiplying with decimals. And that's a big change to remember because that is one of the main things that helps us out with our next set, which is going into dividing decimals. So in dividing decimals, instead of having to worry about things towards the end or having to line things up, we have to start off by just worrying about setting up our equation. So every equation that you set up for dividing decimals, you're going to have to do it set up for long division, because every decimal has to be corrected in a way to make it to where it makes sense. But it's easiest to do that when you set it up for long division, because our next step is involving the decimal points. So when we're setting up for our decimal points, we need to look at our denominator, which is our outside number. We move our decimal place over until it's all the way to the right so that we have a whole number. And then however many spaces we moved it on our denominator, we also need to move it for our numerator. So for the example, we moved it 2 spaces over to get from 0.02 to 2, and we have to do the same thing to the inside, so it goes from 48.246 to 4824.6. So always make sure that you move the same amount of spaces for both numbers. That's the main way that we're going to make sure that these are proper. And then after that, we solve them like regular, making sure to, of course, add zeros and place the decimals in the same spots when we finish up and we answer. So as you can see, it's all going to wind up still dividing out the same way. We just need to make sure that we put down our decimal points in the right spot. And that should cover the essentials for all 4. So now we know how to add, we know how to subtract, we know how to multiply, and we know how to divide. And the reason why multiplication will be important for the division is because it's what we use to double check our answer. So with that in mind, let's do a couple of practice ones. Alright, so for our first one, we have 2.5 minus 0.16. So to set this up, we're going to set this up with 2.5, like that. Sorry if it's a little bit bigger than what I probably should be. And then we're going to set it up. We're going to make sure that we line up our decimals for these ones. We're going to put 0.16. So now you see that the 1 is going to be directly below the 5 because they're on the same part of the decimal placing. And so then just to make sure that we have everything lined up, we're going to put a 0 next to our 5. And then we're going to subtract everything. So we can't do 0 minus 6, so we'll borrow. 10 minus 6 is 4, 4 minus 1 is 3. And then there's nothing left except the 2. So our answer would be 2.34. And so we know that that's the right answer because we've lined up our decimals and we've done everything that we need to subtract the problem down correctly. Looking at number 2, we've got 3.5 times 2.13. So we're going to set that one up. And for this one, again, we don't have to worry about where the decimals are located. We just need to worry about having them line up so that they're right under each other. And that's because that way we don't have to worry about where our numbers are going when we're multiplying them. So then we start solving things out. 5 times 3 is 15, 6, 10. Then we drop our 0 for the tens place. 9, 3, and 6. We add those up. We get 5. It's 15. Carry the 1, 4, and 7. So now we have the number 7455. And now if we go back up to the top, we'll see we have 1, 2, 3. Here, let me go over that in a different color so that we can see it. We have 1, 2, 3 numbers to the right of the decimal place. And so then we're going to go in 1, 2, 3 places. So then our answer for that is going to be 7.455. And we know that that works because of the 3 that were set up before going back into the bottom to make sure that we have the exact amount of decimal places. And now we go down to number 3. Number 3, we have 7.5 divided by 0.5, 0.05 specifically. So we're going to set this up. We're going to start with our division sign. But real quick, we're going to start with the smaller one right here just so that you can see what's going to happen first. So we've got 0.05 and 7.5. Sorry, having some trouble with my writer. And the way that we set this up, our second step, we move our decimal place over on the far side. That way we have a whole number. So we move it 1, 2 spaces over in here, which means that since our other decimal is right here, we're going to have to move it over 1, 2, and since there's not another number, we're going to have to add a 0. So then, I'm going to go ahead and grab my eraser real quick. I'm going to clear that out and redraw it so that's easier. We're going to have 750. And then we're going to have 5. So now 5 goes into 750. We know that 5 goes into 7 once. 7 minus 5 is 2. Bring down our 5. Goes into 25 5 times. 5 times 5 is 25. 0. Bring down our 0. And our answer is 150. Now to double check that, we can always plug it back in. And we're going to use our original number from the first part to double check. So if we go 150 times 0.05, and we follow the same rules as before, 0, 5 times 5 is 25, carry the 2, 5, 6, 7. You see we have 750 there, and then we carry over, because of how many we have, 1, 2, 7.5. So we get the same answers, and we have the correct answer of 150. Alright guys, that's it. Hopefully you'll be able to recognize how to multiply, divide, add, and subtract with decimal numbers now. Thank you so much for your time, and have a good rest of your day.